Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. And welcome to our webinar from OCA titled Can Best of Breed Security Tools Be Orchestrated? Most organizations are struggling with security complexity. Siloed, security data siloed, underutilized tools, too many alerts, too few resources. We all know it being in the security industry. And all of this is going on while cyber attacks are constantly increasing. Given the roles Open Cybersecurity Alliance is playing as an industry alliance to drive security interoperability, we thought it would be good to address this issue head on and share our perspective on how organizations can work in this challenging environment. Thus, we are bringing to you this webinar with our esteemed panelist. And this will be recorded if you want to go back and refer to it later or share it with folks within your team. So from a panelist perspective, one, I'm so excited to have Fran Howarth with us, who's the security practice lead with Blow Research. She's got 25 plus years of experience in information security and is currently focusing on detection and response. Jason Kierstead, who's the CTO for IBM Security Threat Management and co-chair for Open Cybersecurity Alliance. Mark Mastrangeli, who's the Chief Product and Revenue Officer at Tenzere. And we've got Adam Montwill, Engineering Director for Center of Internet Security, who's been working on information security since the mid-90s and has experience with US DoD, startups, big corporations, software security vendors, and now at a nonprofit. So Fran, Jason, Mark, Adam, welcome to this panel. We look forward to this exciting conversation and thank you for sparing the time to join us.
Thanks, Anshul.
So with that, let me first start with Fran. Fran, we know we talked about the security complexity and what's going on in the world today. I just wanted to get your perspective as the security practice leader at Blow Research in terms of what you're seeing and some of the things and things you're learning based on the interaction that you're having with clients. So curious to get your thoughts on this.
Well, thank you, Anshul. You've already mentioned the important word here, which is interoperability, which is essential for orchestration. And interoperability and data sharing are necessary to better inform threat detection, hunting, analysis, and incident response. But the problem is that organizations have far too many tools. And the rule of thumb is that the average enterprise has about 50 disparate tools from various different vendors. And none of these really work together. They've all been put in place to solve a particular issue, but they work in isolation. And they throw up a huge number of alerts that only a quarter of which are actually meaningful. And this takes up so much time. And you mentioned that, I think you mentioned that many organizations are lacking the resources who are really skilled in all the complex technologies and how to get the best out of them. And they're also facing an uphill battle against adversaries who are much better resourced and really want to target your organization, no matter what size or no matter what industry. So we need to go to where they are. We need to use their tools and techniques. And a lot of this is being put into the developments that we're seeing. Integration is key for getting the bigger picture as to what is going on the network, the extended network, the cloud, out into industrial control systems. Feeds have to be correlated from multiple tools. And I mentioned this 50. I haven't even gone into the cloud space. It requires central analysis that really gives greater context about what is happening in order to prevent successful attacks and limit the damage. So what we're seeing is these technologies really being combined into platforms that combine multiple technologies. And some of these are really quite new. At the basis for many large organizations in particular, there are SIEM systems, which are security information and event management systems. And these have become foundational. But they have their limitations in what feeds can be put in. They've never been particularly good at insider threats. You really need to know how to query them, how to work them. They're complex, they're expensive, So over time, we've seen some complementary technologies being added into the mix. First, we had endpoint detection and response. And here I'm an analyst, I'm going into acronyms, EDR. And this is where feeds are being taken from endpoints and hosts in order to see what anomalies are out there, what suspicious behavior. And this has been around for quite some time. Then we get UABA, which is user and entity behavioral analytics. And this focuses more directly on the behavior in order to provide context as what's going on, who is doing what, in order to look for deviations from the norm. SOAR is security orchestration, automation and response, which aims to make the incident response process more efficient, but this is very highly complex. We are now seeing it embedded into these platforms, which is democratizing it and taking it away from just being useful for the very largest enterprises. And most recently, we got NDR, which is network detection and response, which has moved on from just looking at traffic flows to actually making sense of these. And telemetry from all these systems are being pulled into one central place so that you can analyze them and you can really get the metadata to see what's going on, and you get very, very highly contextualized alerts that you can really deal with. Of course, then we've got MDR, which is managed detection and response. And this is particularly useful for those organizations that wish to combine access to technology with human expertise, which is provided by the service provider. And for one more acronym, we've now got XDR, for extended detection and response. And this is really where all of these technologies that I've been mentioned have come in together. It's fairly new. Not a lot of people actually really know it or have put it in place yet, but this is coming up fast, and this will form the basis for many of the MDR services that you've seen as well. But what these all have in common is integration, and that is absolutely essential for making sense of what is going on in your organization. They must take feeds throughout the enterprise network and beyond to make sense of that activity. And it's only by playing attackers at their own game that organizations can hope to get the upper hand.
This is awesome, Fran. Thank you so much for providing that landscape. And I couldn't agree more. You talked about the security complexity and how the different tools are evolving. You talked about SIEM, EDR, UBA, SOAR, NDR, and of course, XDR. And I think the key point that you hit upon was integration and having all of these tools work together. So thank you for sharing what you're hearing from your clients and prospects and what you're seeing in the field. So I'm going to now turn it over to Adam and get his thoughts. Adam, thank you for joining this panel. What are you seeing from the field, given the varied experience that you have, and now you're working from a nonprofit? What are you seeing from a CIS perspective? Would love to get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First of all, I'm happy to be here. Happy to join the conversation, as it were. So from my perspective, I kind of see this like a wheel of cybersecurity. People talk about wheels, the history keeps repeating itself. And I go by basically 4 tenets, if you will, that kind of inform really what all these technologies that Fran just talked about, like why they exist and why we keep doing these things over and over and over again. But I think threats themselves haven't really changed over time, but the tactics have. So I think no matter what the threat of the day is, we can build that into an existing threat taxonomy. And I think that even though these threats really haven't changed, the reason I point this one out is because we still find ourselves behind. Like threats to confidentiality are still threats to confidentiality, right? Extortion is still extortion. Any new internet threat out there or cybersecurity threat that comes out can be classified in something already. So why can't we respond quickly enough? I think there are a few reasons for that. First, the pace of technological change doesn't slow down, right? Technological change keeps moving very quickly, very rapidly. I think we all probably have smartphones in our pocket. The iPhone was first released in 2007. That wasn't that long ago. First systems on a chip were being designed at the turn of this century, and now everything's a system on a chip. You have multiples of those in technologies. And I think existing technology vendors keep moving forward. New ones keep popping up, and they don't really, we're not keeping up with that in the cybersecurity space either. I also think about quantum computing, right? Like 20 years ago, quantum was kind of a dream. And now you can actually rent quantum computing time from Amazon, or other providers. It's not really mainstream yet, but it's going to get there eventually, I think. So, how do we keep up with the technological change, the pace of that? The third thing, systems complexity. And I think this one's really important because with the advent of cloud, the popularity of it, everybody's, doing a lift and shift, but then after they get shifted over, they realize that they can start taking advantage of cloud native technologies, right? So you think about what does that actually result in? If you take advantage of cloud native technologies, you're looking at systems that are highly distributed and constantly changing, always available. And how do we manage the change in those systems with them being dynamic? It's difficult. And then the fourth thing I think that I would mention is that cybersecurity resources, human resources specifically, are still scarce, right? I think this is not even an argument. I don't know that I would find anybody to argue against, but I don't think there's any way we're going to resource our way out of the cybersecurity problem, if that makes sense. But essentially, those four things are kind of this wheel that just keep turning, right? Like keep thinking, oh, we'll just train more. That doesn't work. Or, we'll just adapt faster or monitor more, or, and it just doesn't work. So then we get all these technologies and really the automation, the models behind that automation, becoming more event driven, that sort of thing, I think that's the direction we need to head in.
This is really good. And I like how you kind of put in terms of the wheel of cybersecurity and the key things that you talked about from the pace of technological change to the system complexity, to the cloud, people, automation. So that was really well described. And thank you for sharing your perspective. I'm going to next move to Mark and see, Mark, what do you think based on what you're seeing, based on the things that you're working on and clients that you're interacting with? How are you seeing this evolving, and what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'll just say that I echo a lot of what Fran and Adam said, and I'll try to repeat them other than to say that. But the interoperability problem, I think that's why we're all here and trying to contribute as part of the Open Cybersecurity Alliance. There's not a silver bullet. Years ago, prior to my current job at Tenzir, I was at McAfee for a very long time, and part of that time at Intel, we tried to do something called OpenDXL, which, and before that, there was a platform approach. And we see vendors today taking this platform approach, but with more modern application stacks, built cloud native. They're easier for the consumer or the enterprise to consume those technologies. They're easier to implement. There's less administrative overhead. And it's validation of that approach that these things have to get stitched together. But it's still, like Adam said, we're on this wheel. Like the history will repeat itself yet again. Even these solutions that are very well stitched together by some very large, very successful vendors, they're very successful because it is the right approach. It's validation that these things have to be very well integrated. This trend of XDR, extended detection and response, the same thing. We need to be able to sift through more data. SIEM is not scaling very well. And start to kind of fall over with the volume of telemetry that customers want to feed into SIEM. Look at NDR, the amount of data that, Zeek or Suricata can generate is just immense. You will crush most SIEM out there today. And then on top of that, like the alert fatigue issue, we need more contextualization of the data that's being generated by any given sensor. And that contextualization has to come from other sources of truth in the environment. So, and that's true for every source. So do all of those things end up in SIEM, where we create data silos, or is it XDR? I don't think the answer is any of those things. I think that we need a connect once, reuse everywhere approach to cybersecurity, and it's got to be vendor neutral, and it cannot be just one vendor who picked, or acquired 5 things, stitch those things together. That will work for a while, but eventually we run out of that runway and we have the same problem again. And in order to solve this in the long run, we here in the OCA think that adoption of standards is the only way. Like, we're the only subdomain of technology that has not really embraced standards, where we've seen convergence of various technologies down to a few vendors. And I think it's because the problem never gets fully solved. There will always be bad actors out there. It's a human issue. And in order for us to move the ball forward, and in order for us to make this interoperability problem go away, so that the limited human resources that we have can focus on the problems of hunting and doing the things that only humans can do, we need better adoption of standards. And we're trying to do that in the OCA. We're trying to move this ball forward. I think it's a chicken or the egg problem. We need customer demand. The customers, the users of our technologies that we're trying to generate, we need that demand to come from our customers in order to see an industry shift. As long as money's flowing towards vendors where there is not an adoption of a standard, then they have no incentive to do so. So I think that those are my thoughts.
That's spot on. And one thing that I'm hearing loud and clear in what Mark, you talked about, Adam talked about, Fran talked about is, and you hit on it as well, is there is no silver bullet, right? This has to be a platform approach, but it has to be a collaborative approach. And I like how you put it, like customers should and have to ask of their vendors that how are they driving interoperability? What standards are they following? How can they help better have the products work together? So that was a very interesting point that I think that you brought up, and something that I would urge for folks on the call to even take back. And as you're discussing with your ecosystem of partners, vendors, and clients to discuss about the interoperability problem and how we can make these tools work together. So thank you for sharing your perspective, Mark. I think this was really helpful. Jason, let me now turn it over to you and get, we've talked about XDR. There were mentions of XDR. Fran mentioned it, Adam touched upon it, Mark talked about it from an interoperability perspective. I'm curious to get your thoughts as well on how you see XDR evolving, and how do you see XDR basically?
Yeah, thanks, Anshul. I think that's an interesting question, especially, tying in some of the earlier conversation from Fran and Mark and Adam. One of the interesting things we see about this XDR space that's emerging, as Fran said, we have all of these disparate, best of breed technologies where you have the SIEM space for the log correlation and collection and data aggregation and analytics, endpoint detection and response for that real-time endpoint detection and forensics and IR capability. You have the SOAR for operations and playbooks, and UEBA and NDR and CDR, et cetera, et cetera. And what you start to see now in the market is like this drive towards more simplicity. And, you know, when you have all of these different tools that are part of your portfolio, how can I bring these things together in a more simple way, you know, to Adam's point, because, you know, we're not going to solve this by just hiring more people and gaining more resources, because there's this never ending hunger for these skilled practitioners. So we really need to simplify. And that's been part of the driver towards XDR. But one of the interesting things that we're seeing in the space is there's two different ways you can go about that type of approach, right? You can either go about it by moving towards the interoperability and standards route and making tools work more closely together so that you can have the best of breed for your environment and your enterprise acting in each of these areas and bringing the insights together and having that 1 + 1 = 3 scenario, right? Where, you know, when we have the best of X and the best of Y, and we can bring those insights together and we get more than the sum of the parts. And that's an approach that's, you know, different. It can be called open XDR, hybrid XDR, and there's different ways to approach it. There's this other viewpoint that's emerging around this idea. Well, you know, it's actually works. It's easier to just have a vertically oriented stack, and just like all of these other technology spaces, you know, you can build XDR much like a SIEM or an EDR and have everything coming from the one place and the one vendor. And I think my prediction is over time, you're going to start to see a lot more gravity towards the former solution and the hybrid and open XDR. And it's pretty simple to see why when you look at the history. And I really love Adam's analogy of this wheel. This wheel keeps on turning in security, and yet we don't, you know, we always don't learn from the lessons of the past. We always think that, you know, this brand new shiny object here is going to solve all my security problems. Right now, that shiny object is XDR. And next year, there'll be a new shiny object. And the reality is that, you know, the clients that we have, you really we need to make more progress on having these solutions seamlessly share insights and capabilities and detections among them to get to this 1 + 1 = 3 scenario, because it's completely unsustainable to be constantly replacing and ripping huge parts of your infrastructure, changing out technology stacks, you know, switching vendors between all these different things. So I think that XDR is a very positive step towards the embrace of this interoperable approach, because it's kind of that game changer that will hopefully kind of be a forcing function down this path. Because if you really want to get to that 1 + 1 = 3, you need interoperability. To Mark's point, you need standards behind that interoperability wherever possible. And that's really, I think, what as an industry we need to be pushing for change in the space, because the only way we're going to get ahead of the adversaries is if we improve collaboration among ourselves. The sad fact is that our adversaries collaborate far better than we do, when it really should be the opposite. And the only way to get that way is working together, you know, breaking down silos, improving interoperability, and, you know, pushing for more standardization of the data flows among cybersecurity products.
I really like how you kind of put it, because I think the two approaches that you're defining, one, the hybrid and the open XDR versus having probably the entire stack from one vendor, I completely agree that hybrid or an open XDR can work with the entire ecosystem that one has, whereas for having the entire stack from one vendor may not necessarily work for all. So I think you brought up a good point. And the other point that you brought around the interoperability and the standards behind them, just like Mark was bringing up, was really good. So thank you. So folks, we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked through the overall problem. We've talked through some of the terms that we hear. We've we've taken perspectives from you. I want to now shift gear and do a quick fire round where I'll ask you one question and ask for your quick guidance. So we'll go the other way now. So Jason, I'll start with you, but one quick question for you. What is the one practical guidance you would give to customers who are on the call today and actions that they can take today?
In a way, I think there's, so I'm going to cheat and say two things. But I'm going to get away with that because Mark stole one of them from me. So the first is that as a customer, you know, one of the best things you can do is leverage your buying power and, you know, demand from your vendors and from your MSSPs and to demonstrate how they are making progress towards interoperability with others. And it really needs to go, and you know, I can kind of, so putting my vendor hat on, I'll tell you, you know, the easy way out will be, well, we have an API. We have an API, so anyone can do anything. And the reality is an API is not enough. It's not enough anymore. You know, we actually have data that shows that in large enterprises, SOCs are spending as much on engineering, integrating their products as they are actually doing the work of cybersecurity itself. And they're having to spend that much work because they're trying to build custom integrations between APIs and integrations between all these products. So, you know, everyone has an API, but an API is not magic, right? Just because two products have an API doesn't mean there's no work to make them talk to each other. The only thing that really moves the needle towards reducing the cost of interoperability is working together and having common standards and common libraries to do that. You really need to have that commonality. So a long-winded answer, but the first thing that you can do is demand, you know, as part of your RFP process, as part of your evaluation, ask them to demonstrate how they're making their product work with others beyond just say their small business partner ecosystem. The second thing I'd say is, you know, engage and participate. So where possible, you know, leverage your voice in forums such as the OCA, Cloud Security Alliance, these other groups, you know, bring the customer perspective into the mix. Because these organizations like the OCA, we are not just a vendor organization. You know, all of the work is open to participate by anyone. And we very much encourage end users of these products to come in, consume some of the projects, consume some of the participate in the working groups, give that feedback directly to us so that we can, you know, shift left and move, you know, take your input into these problem spaces as soon as possible. So those would be the two things to me: is leverage your buying power and engage in the community wherever possible.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Mark, I know Jason kind of touched upon the point that you were bringing earlier. You want to build on that point, or any other guidance that you would like to bring or just share for the clients to kind of work on?
Yeah, so I think that I do think it is possible to build a sustainable, you know, security architecture. You know, I think if I was building this for my large enterprise today, I would be focused on, you know, an event streaming backbone that is not cybersecurity specific, that I can build things around. You know, sustainability, I think, is critical if we want to start to move the needle, and doing things like that, you know, your cybersecurity vendors are not, is leveraging your buying power. And I think you will start to see change. So, but I totally, you know, I totally agree with you. I think that's spot on. You know, having worked for cybersecurity vendors for my entire career, it is a constant conversation that is like, is there customer demand? Like, that's the question being asked in strategy sessions, like every day. Is there customer demand? That will change the behavior of what we're building. Because at the end of the day, as vendors, like, we are building for you, the end customer. Like, we want passionately to help solve problems. And, I think, but we have to do it in a sustainable way. At the end of the day, and this will be my last comment, cybersecurity architecture is a heterogeneous distributed system. For that to ever work, there have to be some upfront design rules for how those distributed heterogeneous pieces eventually come together. And those are the standards that we need.
Awesome. Awesome. Adam, I'm now going to turn it over to you and get your advice on this.
I don't know how much I can add to what Jason and Mark have already said, but I think really to bring it back to that wheel, if we want to break that wheel, I think there are the three things, and I think they touched on it, right? We need collaboration, we need to work together. And why do we need to work together? To do, from my perspective, two things. One, we want to standardize extensible semantics around what we're doing in cybersecurity space. And then the second thing we need to do there is standardize event-driven, vendor-agnostic architecture. And I think with that, we stand a real chance of getting ahead of things. So I'll leave it at that. I'll be pretty quick, concise, I guess.
That's awesome. So your one word is standardize. That's awesome. Okay, Fran, we want to close it with you. You opened the discussion talking about the challenging environment that's there. Your one practical guidance to folks on the call and customers on what they should be doing.
Well, I just really want to point out that what we're talking about is a goal, and there is a journey to get there. And so that we don't fall into the same old traps of putting in the point solutions. You've really, as an organization, you've got to do the work yourself before you decide what you're going to do. You've got to get stakeholders involved. You've got to define what are your most critical assets and start there so that you can actually show that this program is working, and then you'll be able to get more backing for more success. And that is really what you need to do in order to get here. Don't try and boil the ocean.
Awesome. So I would take that one word as collaboration and working within the organization. So that's great. So as we were doing this discussion, so I've recently been fascinated by one words, like how do we summarize? And as each of you were describing it, I was taking notes and catching that one word. So some of the key one words that I've caught are demand and engage, Jason, that you brought up, sustainable, Mark, that you brought up, standardize, Adam, that you brought up, collaboration, Fran, that you brought up. And all of this is under the interoperability umbrella. So we covered a lot of good ground today on one, overall organizations should look at interoperability, how their tools work together. And within that, key tenets of what they could do: demand, engage, sustainable solutions, standardize, collaboration. We'll make sure to include this in what we are sharing. But for now, let's just open it up for Q&A. There were a lot of questions that came in the Q&A section, and there is a very active chat section as well. So let's just go through the questions that came in Q&A, and then we can go through the chat section. So the first question that I'm seeing is, Jason, you talked about collaboration, and you talked about how organizations can engage and want to engage with OCA. So the question is, can you talk more about Open Cybersecurity Alliance and how I can engage with Open Cybersecurity Alliance? So D, I'm not sure if you're on the call, but if you're still there, I would love to get your perspective on how folks on the call can engage with OCA, and if you can quickly provide an overview of OCA.
Absolutely. Just bear with me 1 second. Let me share my screen.
Awesome.
So just real quickly. So there are, this is an open community. And you can, if you'd like to just dip your toe in the water, we need as much, we've made a lot of progress. There are lots of tools that are already available, but we've got a long way to go. We've got a very active Slack channel. I would recommend that the first thing you do is get on GitHub, which I have a link here, and you can see how much work has already been done, where you can potentially make a contribution. There's also lots of YouTube videos. We are trying very hard to record all of our meetings. So if you want to get up to speed on the zero trust work group or indicators of behavior or posture assessment, again, there's a lot of stuff going on. You can watch these videos and come up to speed with exactly where the work group is. Again, this is completely open. Anybody can watch the videos, anybody can join the Slack channel and ask your questions. Again, like I said, there's a lot going on. We do depend on the community sponsorship to provide the infrastructure for the OCA. We have our sponsors here. We've got some great sponsorship. We could always, we always would like to invite more. What you get in return is a seat at the board on the project governing board. So that's also important. I'd be happy to talk with you about that. But I think that's it. I know that we're over, and I also know that there is a lot of chat going on. I will follow up with everybody with the slides, and also if we have not gotten to your question, we are more than happy to take it offline and answer you. We just want to make certain that you have a sense of what we're trying to do in this community, and hopefully today has provided you with that opportunity to do so. I'd like to thank the speakers. Thank you, Anshul, for pulling a lot of this together. Adam, Jason, Mark, Fran, very much so. Delighted that you could join us today and set the stage and also, bring us home. So thanks again, everybody. Any closing remarks?
No, I want to thank all the panelists. I think it was a great discussion, and thank you for sharing your perspectives on this. It was really good to get this diverse perspective.
Terrific job.
Anshul, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A. I don't know if we answer all the questions in the Zoom Q&A.
Yeah, I'm seeing them. Dee, do we have time? Can we do those Q&A now?
We can go as long as people are willing to stay on. This is a dynamic conversation. So yeah, carry on.
Awesome. So first question that I'm seeing here is on what unique challenges do you see that the public sector has versus private companies or other organizations?
Might be, I'm not sure, Adam might be a good person to comment on that since CIS runs the SISAC. Any thoughts
so I
there?
think for public organizations, the challenge isn't actually that much different from, and let me back up a second. So we deal a lot with what we call SLTTs, state, local, territorial, tribal governments for the US government, right? Here in the United States. Depending on which municipality, which locality you're talking about, they could be functioning very much like a large organization or a large enterprise, so they have the resources. It's really at what we would call here the county level and below where they really have challenges, where there might not even be an IT person, let alone anybody to do anything cybersecurity wise, but they still have to use technology and they still have to be secure in some way. So I think their biggest challenge is really the resource, right? And that speaks to, this scarcity of cybersecurity resources. Then how do we deal with that? And if they had more tooling that was more, interoperable, had some user experience behind it, some actual design behind it to make it more usable for pretty much anybody, they would be far better off. So I think that's their biggest challenge, is just being able to even get to thinking about cybersecurity, and let alone doing anything about it.
Awesome. There is a similar question, like but it's, do you think the March 9, 2022 digital asset distributed computing executive order that's been there will help drive adoption of cybersecurity standards, either within the financial industry that leads to all else, or adoption of generally applicable standards. So I think the question is around the role that the executive order could play. So anyone wants to take that?
Well, I'll try to answer that, open it up for others. So from what I saw of that executive order, I didn't see, so that order was mostly around asked to research and report back on digital assets and cryptocurrency and blockchain assets, et cetera. I didn't see anything in it specifically towards, say, any type of increased regulation around DeFi companies. So I could have missed it. I guess I didn't notice anything specific that would affect what we're talking about. I hope that it has something in it that would encourage further adoption of standards. But from what I saw of the order, I didn't see anything directly applicable. I'm not sure if anybody else in the call read it or is aware more than myself.
I have not read that one, but I remember very vividly the one from May last year, the executive order on improving the nation's cyber defenses or something like that. I think that I do see that is having an effect. I know that in the Open Cybersecurity Alliance, we do have a focus area within the posture assessment or posture attribute collection and evaluation working group where the software bill of materials is something that we are focused on. And I think that definitely has a little bit of extra push behind it and a lot more interest and collaboration from the quote unquote community at large, from vendors and different entities in the U.S. federal government, as well as, advanced enterprises that, have the resources to be on that bleeding edge and push for those sort of standards. So I think that executive orders are helpful and, those things do certainly have an effect.
Awesome. Now there are a couple of other questions in the chat. I know it's been discussed in the chat, but I'm going to bring up maybe one or two just if people have not heard it. So I think the first question is, Mark, for you. And I know you've answered this in the Slack, but if you want to repeat that again, which standards are most important for vendors to adopt in order to achieve progress?
Yeah, it's a great question. Early days when we were starting the OCA, we discussed this a lot, and not to be a smart ass, but I think that the most important standards for us to adopt are the ones that we have. They're not perfect, but we've got to start somewhere. Where standards don't work is when everybody is trying to create something that they call a standard. That's not standardization. I think we have some very good ontological things. We have good taxonomies, we have good schema, we have good frameworks for sharing threat intelligence, for sharing rules, things like Sigma, things like Yara. Sticks 2.1 is phenomenal. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But there's some great work going on in that. And when there's adoption and broader usage, we will find more of those flaws and we'll have more people working on improving things, and they'll get better rapidly. So I think, that's critical. But when I think of standards, I think, and think of an event-driven distributed system for a bunch of heterogeneous cybersecurity things, we can boil it down to, the way things, communicate about things that they've seen, things that they know, and things that they can do. So, I think sticks as a, for cyber observables, OpenC2 for how we can take actions across heterogeneous things. And then, things that are known. Again, I think back to sticks, covers a lot of ground there.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Another question I see is what consideration or efforts are being made what considerations efforts are being made for efforts in OCA such as PACE to succeed where previous efforts have failed? So I think it's about why OCA is different and how OCA is different. And Adam, looks like you've responded to that. So do you mind just calling that out and building on your response?
No, not at all. Not at all. Specifically because I was involved in the previous efforts as well. Hopefully that's not the common thread. But in any case, I think what makes the biggest difference in what we're doing with PACE and other projects in OCA is really that we're flipping things on its head, right? Which is really what attracted me to OCA in the first place. Was, we're working on we're trying to get working solutions done before we write too much, right? Whereas like back in the IETF, when we did the security automation and continuous monitoring working group, we tried to write everything down first and then work to implement. And when you try to write everything down first, you can really get spun around the axle, rather, like in the details, right? Instead of just trying things and seeing what works, what doesn't work. And I think the other benefit really is that we have a strong community. SBOM is a big push in that particular project, in the PACE project. So in other words, there's some momentum with that. And I think that, and this is no slight on IETF or any other formal standards organization, like an SDO, but they tend to be a little bigger, have more process. It's a little slower. I think what we're doing in our project and other projects is a little faster moving. We're a little more nimble.
Awesome.
I don't know if anyone else has anything to say about that, but
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the like you say, Adam, one of the benefits of the OCA and OASIS open projects in general is this idea of marrying the best of an open source, very agile approach with a standards approach, and taking that code before paper type of motion. So
awesome. Well, I know we went a couple of minutes over. We are at 12:47, but thank you everyone for dialing in and all to our panelists. I think this was a very exciting and an engaging discussion. We covered a lot of ground. Fran, particularly thanks to you for sharing all the insights and what you've been working on and interacting with clients, and Adam and Jason and Mark. So this was a really helpful discussion. And on a personal level, looks like we will have the Wheel of Cybersecurity feature on Amazon on a side note. So all people over here would be on that. So just a side joke. But no, thank you for this engaging discussion. And thank you for all who dialed in, were so actively involved in either the chat or the Q&A. And we look forward to you guys joining either a Slack channel or a community, getting engaged, because I think one of the key things that we're hearing in the chat, in the discussion today, is engagement, with both internally within your organization and with the organizations driving collaboration. So we look forward to reaching out to us and collaborating. So with that, we close today's panel discussion, and thank you again for joining.
Thanks,
Great
everybody.
job, folks.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.